So next up, we have the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. So we've got, assume it's Rebecca here in person, and did you have some online as well? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, they should be here in person.
Okay.
I had the benefit of just being next door, so I was able to just walk straight through. But I'm sure they'll be here in due course.
Okay.
Wouldn't want to hold the committee business up.
So you have 20 minutes.
Kia ora,
So,
thank you.
Far away.
Look, members, Mr. Chair, the Commissioner is currently on leave and cannot attend committee today. I'm sorry. However, this oral submission has been signed off from him. I'm Rebecca Thornley, the Commissioner's General Counsel, and hopefully will be joined by several colleagues shortly. This submission is made in the context of the PCE's functions under Section 16 of the Environment Act, undertaken with a view to maintain or improve the environment, spanning the entire environmental management system, of which fisheries management is a part. The PCE submission today will address three aspects that were not covered in the written submission. These are the impact on fisheries decisions, including standard factors, application of the Official Information Act and access to onboard camera footage, and the interface between the Fisheries Act and the Resource Management Act, which at the moment may be replaced by the Planning Bill and Natural Environment Bill. Turning to the first point of decision making. This bill substantially changes the way that the Minister will make total allowable catch decisions. While some of these changes are discussed in the written submission, I address the introduction of standard factors as decision-making criteria. Standard factors limit the extent to which the Minister can take into account environmental principles when setting the TAC, which otherwise apply to all persons exercising functions and powers under the Act. This was part of the fundamental design of the 1996 Act. These principles and the philosophy that sustainability underpins TAC decisions are consistent with New Zealand's international obligations under UNCLOS, as originally endorsed by this very committee in its final report on the Fisheries Bill in 1996. Standard factors include the environmental conditions that affect specified stock and the social, cultural, and economic factors the Minister considers relevant. By limiting the application of the environmental principles, not prioritising environmental factors over this list of other matters, and the reference to TAC being removed from sustainability measures, TAC decisions will fail to uphold the fundamental purpose of fisheries management. I'd like to introduce my colleague Jeff Simmons, our Chief Advisor, Strategy and Policy.
Kia ora, just in time. Over the long term, setting TAC should be entirely a matter of responding to biophysical realities. Imposing concepts like quota management areas and maximum sustainable yield for single stocks onto complex and mobile biological systems isn't straightforward. As EDS points out, in the absence of other tools addressing localized biophysical issues will sometimes require maintaining or building a greater abundance of stock than maximum sustainable yield will suggest. Social, cultural, and economic factors don't alter that biophysical reality. If adjustments in TAC are needed, it may be possible to do that in a way that considers social, cultural, and economic realities in the short term. However, in the long term, consideration of social, cultural, and economic factors will detract from the necessary focus on biophysical realities to the detriment of both the marine environment and fisheries. We acknowledge that the TAC may not always be the ideal place to embed the consideration of all environmental impacts of fishing. Ideally, there would be greater use of spatial planning, particularly different kinds of marine reserves and potentially some maximum size limits for catch in certain areas. Managing fisheries solely through TAC decisions is really a second-best policy response. However, in lieu of other spatial protection tools, the TAC is all that we have. And our recommendations on this issue are to not exclude TAC from sustainability measures, do not limit the consideration of environmental principles to the standard factors, and make explicit that environmental conditions affecting stock is the primary consideration, but the Minister may have regard to social, cultural and economic factors.
Mr Chair, moving to the application of the OIA and access to onboard camera footage. The bill proposes to exclude application of the OIA to camera recordings and instead provides limited circumstances in which disclosure may occur. The policy rationale does not establish the risk that this amendment seeks to address, based on the number of OIA requests that have been made and the volume of camera footage that has been disclosed since the requirement was introduced. As we understand it, as at 12 March 2025, MPI had received 14 OIA requests, but we are not aware of any footage having been released so far. The policy problem, which is outlined in Appendix 4 of the Regulatory Impact Statement, is that privacy and commercially sensitive information may be disclosed through an OIA release. However, the OIA has always provided for the withholding of information on a number of grounds, including the protection of privacy. It appears, Mr Chair, that there is no convincing evidence to explain why these existing protections are inadequate. The transparency that access to camera footage brings with it incentivises operators to comply with catch management requirements. It ensures accuracy in reporting requirements. And as the Ombudsman has submitted, it upholds the purposes of both the OIA and the Fisheries Act. Mr Chair, I also provide a comparison to that even heavily protected national security information, where the need for secrecy is so well justified and understood. This remains subject to oversight and public assurance through the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security. The PCE recommends that the OIA should continue to apply to onboard footage. But if the committee is seeking assurances relating to disclosure, we note that the Ombudsman has suggested an amendment to the OIA to that effect and is prepared to issue guidance to assist. The PCE supports the submission of the Ombudsman, which the committee should carefully consider. Finally, Mr Chair, turning to the interface between the Fisheries Act and RMA reform. Through the decision of the Court of Appeal in the case of Motiti, it was confirmed that the RMA had a wider focus than the Fisheries Act, protecting biodiversity and natural character values in the coastal marine area for their own sake, rather than for their connection to the utilisation of fisheries resource. This decision provided councils with clear criteria to apply when they are developing rules which would impact fisheries management. However, this was responded to by the Resource Management Consenting and Other System Changes Amendment Act 2025, which constrained the scope of the rules that can be imposed by regional councils. In doing so, it muddied the clarity that was provided by the Court of Appeal. It introduced a process which confuses the performance of functions under the two acts. For example, despite being prohibited by RMA Section 30, subsection 2, from undertaking functions regarding fisheries management, the process requires council to comprehensively assess the impacts on fishing, despite regional councils not being fisheries experts. The The concurrence of the Director General of MPI on proposed rules is also required, though their decision to concur is limited in its scope and does not include consideration of the purpose or the principles of the Fisheries Act. These changes to the RMA are carried over into the Planning Bill and Natural Environment Bill, which are currently before another select committee. This bill seeks to weaken environmental considerations that fisheries decisions should be having regard to. The Fisheries Act, if amended, would no longer provide assurance that fisheries management will be grounded in the biophysical constraints of the marine environment. Weakening environmental considerations under both legislative schemes that are supposed to protect marine biodiversity means considerable risk for degradation of the marine environment and fisheries. Mr. Chair, that concludes the prepared comments from the PCE, and we're happy to take questions from members.
Very good.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Rachel first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the submission. I'm keen to ask for your thoughts on part of the bill that you haven't actually commented on. So I'm hoping you have considered this, and that's the part around the carry forward of ACE. So as you'll be aware, there's an annual catch entitlement, and there are some species that can currently have up to 10% carry forward. And what the bill would allow is, in extreme circumstances, a 100% carry forward if the minister made that determination. There have been some concerns raised about that, which I share, around that could have an impact on the sustainability of the stock. So I'm just interested in whether you've considered that particular part of the bill, any suggestions you might have to improve it, any concerns you might have around sustainability measures.
We haven't looked at that one, unfortunately. No, not in any great detail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're more than happy to receive questions, Mr. Chair, from members if you would like written feedback from the PCE.
I'd really appreciate that one. So the particular issue, there's some really good examples where it has been used and then hasn't been used. So rock lobster gives some good examples. During COVID, there was an order in council so that they could transfer quota after a market collapse, and then they considered it after Cyclone Gabrielle, and decided not to do a carryover. The concern that's been raised is, at the moment it's 10%. This would allow 100%. And is there enough information on the stock? All of those things. So yeah, if you could provide us with some written advice on that particular issue, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think what we could do afterwards is get
Some written questions.
written questions.
Yeah.
Now, Steve, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the submission. In your decision-making under uncertainty, you point out the effective assessment requires biological and ecological information, catch composition, size, age, structure, to estimate biomass, population dynamics, all of these factors. And yet, if I understood correctly, you just articulated that you did support the minister taking into consideration environmental, social and cultural factors as well as the biological. My concern around that is what are particularly the economic, social or cultural factors. Culture is in a different category, I think, but what are the economic or social factors that would override a biological need to reduce the catch?
Yeah, as I indicated, we see that as a short-term consideration, and I think the current drafting of the bill does allow for those considerations to be taken into the decision-making process when thinking about a transition. So if reductions have to be made, how is that managed from an economic and a social perspective? And I think the current system is working well in that respect. So I think that in the short term, those sorts of factors can be taken into consideration, but in the long term, it's inappropriate.
As a supplement, it seems to me a concern, and it seems to me a weakening of the basic evaluation of the ecological health of the stock to allow the minister to consider economic things, unless that's within a very narrow scope of something like what you just described. So would you want to see greater clarification of the extent to which those factors could be considered, and in such a way as they don't override the ecological and biological reality of the health of the ecosystem and the stock?
Yeah, and yes, and I think that the current drafting of the Act allows for that. Yeah.
Rachel?
Just to sup on that, because this has been a topic of discussion amongst submitters around the factors that I call them. I guess, and this is something you might need to come back to us again as a written question. Would you consider, I guess, a hierarchy of the factors in terms of the importance of which ones are considered? Because I think that's one of the things, like what's the hierarchy and the order that you would consider them in terms of which ones carry more weight and which ones don't?
That is certainly a drafting solution that the committee could pursue and request further advice from officials about what that might look like, if that was what you were minded to do. We're having very similar conversations at the moment in the Environment Committee in relation to the Planning and Natural Environment bills, in terms of the environment, and in this case, the marine environment will tell you what the biophysical constraints are. It doesn't matter what decisions are made. It doesn't matter what hierarchy of considerations you try to apply through the law. The environment will tell you what is or is not possible. There will or will not be fish to be fished. So on that basis, the submission of the Commissioner has been that your biophysical constraints must be your primary consideration, not because this House says that that's what is required. That is simply the environment in which you're operating, and that will tell you what is required.
Rachel?
I do have a sup on that, which I guess one of the challenges in the ocean, and again, happy for you to come back, the challenges in the ocean is that we can't see all of it, right? And so unlike making land-based assessments in terms of the biological impacts of the ocean, the ability to see everything that's out there is so limited, both in terms of fish stock, but then other parts of ocean health. So, I mean, have you got any thoughts about investment that's needed to actually get that level of information so that we can make the decision about the impact on the environment?
So these are questions that we would welcome, certainly following the submission today. Unfortunately, our chief scientist is also currently on leave, but both he and the Commissioner are returning next week and would be the best placed expert to assist with providing information to the committee on those matters.
But I do draw your attention to our written submission in the section decision-making under uncertainty, where we do discuss these sorts of issues and talk about how a more precautionary approach might work, and that stocks that have good information have more flexibility than stocks with poor information, and those are the sorts of incentives that could be built into the system. Yeah,
Steve, you'd sup.
Yeah, I guess the concern is when you say the biophysical limits of the ocean will be self-evident, there will or there will not be fish. I guess what we're trying to do is manage so that there are fish, because clearly when there has been evidence that a fishery is in trouble, there hasn't been sufficient rapidity of intervention to protect the remaining stock so that it can recover more quickly. The Hawkeye fishery being a recent example, I guess. And our concern, just to belabor this point somewhat, is that if we give scope for other considerations, then simply the available evidence on the biological and the ecological health of the fishery, then that will tend to want to override the evidence that the fishery can't handle the current take.
Again, as Jeff responded, would point you to the relevant part of our written submission, but would be certainly
You don't disagree with that?
We'd be happy to provide more information if you had a further question or statement you wanted to put to the Commissioner, Jeff.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say at a high level is that, the design of the QMS was intended to create incentives for self-regulation. And I think the fact is that that's worked in some fisheries and not others. And that requires a much deeper analysis on the interplay between, the different players in the fisheries system. So you're really, I think the answer to your question would be it depends on the fishery, and a lot more analysis will be required to really get into that. Yeah.
Susan,
You said that towards the end of your submission, it seems perverse to knowingly undermine access to information about our fish stocks. I just wondered what you meant by that, because I would have thought that actually we've got better information about our fish stocks now than we had sort of 20 or 30 years ago or even before, and it seems to be improving. But just in particular, what you meant by it seems perverse to knowingly undermine access to information about our fish stocks.
We draw your attention to the paragraph under decision-making under uncertainty, which catalogues that there has been in recent years a fall in the overall funding for research, both from the fisheries sector and the Crown. So that's what we are referring to there.
okay.
So you're talking about the amount of research, the funding of research.
That's right.
Specifically.
Yeah.
I'll give my burning question to my colleagues.
So just burning question is, you talked about fish stocks as being the kind of primary consideration, but would you agree that actually ocean health as well matters? And that there needs to, that it's not just about fish stock, but actually the importance of the role the ocean plays. Yeah, that is an important consideration.
Again, I draw your attention to our written submission in the last section on failure to move towards an integrated approach to fisheries management. Some of the criticisms that exist about the QMS currently are that it takes a single species approach. And what the Commissioner is saying here is that really these changes are doubling down on that. We're moving even more to a more single species approach than previously. Yes, of course, we would advocate for a system which takes a broader perspective. But as I said previously, the tools that exist within the system are not ideal for that, and we have spoken previously in other submissions about the need for marine spatial planning, and that sort of approach would give you more tools to deal with ecosystem impacts rather than trying to do everything through setting TAC.
Thank you very much. We've come to time, and I'm sure we'll have you back in at some stage in the future for various issues. So
great. And yeah, do get in touch with written questions.
Yeah, we'll probably put together some question fire through for post-hearing inquiry.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.